more. And so it makes sense to base our breakpoints and our design thinking around these parts of the design. So what is the future of responsive design processes and design systems? I think that the important thing to remember is that nobody is an expert. There are some people that shout a bit louder than other people, and I think that's about it. I think that we need to look to other industries that have had these problems before and see how they've solved them. If you look at a lot of desktop apps, they've been responsive for years and years. So we can learn from how they've solved the problems. I think it's really important for everyone to experiment and communicate these experiments, not be embarrassed if you've messed something up. Talk about it, share it, like say this is why I made this mistake, and this is how we can make sure that none of you lot make that mistake as well. So that was me, and if you like all the icons that I used, I very much recommend these different icon libraries. Thank you.
Great stuff. And I think what Laura was saying there about the importance of sharing and communicating will get emphasized again and again, and I'm certainly going to emphasize it today. Share your learning experiences, your successes and your failures. Share your data. Get it out there. Okay, so final speaker of this slot, and then we'll get together for a chat on the sofa, is Elliot J. Stocks, man who needs no introduction.
Oh, hang on a minute. But the man who does need to get his keynote display ready. There we go. Cool, thanks for having me, guys. Some really good talks so far, and I think I'm basically just going to be repeating a lot of what's already been said, but hopefully that's a good thing, that we're all kind of thinking along the same lines. I thought as we're talking about the future and cutting-edge technology, I would put my notes on paper. So we'll see how that goes. So, responsive web design. I think the war has not yet been won. All the cool kids are doing it, right? Actually, before we get going, let's have a little bit of a quick survey. So, raise your hand if you feel that you are someone who's building a lot of responsive sites, and you are telling all your clients and your boss about it, and you're a convert basically. Raise your hands. Okay, that's pretty much what I'd expect from this audience. Okay, so raise your hand if you are, you're a little bit wary, a little bit cynical, you're just experimenting with responsive web design, you're not quite sure about it yet, you've encountered a few problems, and you're kind of on the fence. We've got any cynics here? Don't be shy, we're all there once. There we go, there's one there. One? There we go, there's a few more. Now I think that's really important. Everyone has been reiterating this point about it's all a case of discovering what's going on, everything's changing, and no one really has a fixed system yet. And I think that's great. We've all been at that point where, oh my God, responsive web design is this new thing, and fluid layouts, oh God, like I can't cope with this. Unless you're Jeremy, of course, who had one up on us all the time. So, responsive web design, let's get to it. We've all been extolling, or most of us in this room anyway, the virtues of Ethan's methodology of using fluid layouts, flexible images, and media queries to kind of kick everything into place. And we've slowly but surely dropped our fixed layouts, and we've adopted this nice fluid system that we have all these sites that bend and flex to every scenario, and they work across all these different devices. Well, has that happened? I would say no, not necessarily. We've still got some work to do yet. So as widely adopted as the process is, there are still numerous designers and developers and agencies and freelancers who they continue to opt for either the safety of fixed widths, or they adopt RWD in some sort of loose form, like having adaptive sizes. So you might have a design for a larger screen and design for a smaller screen, and you simply snap to those individual ones. Or you might do something like changing to the screen only when it's like a mobile-like resolution, whatever that means. So it's easy to dismiss these people doing this as old-school agencies or print-focused creatives who don't really get the web. And they certainly do account for a large number of people who are kind of RWD wary, as it were. But But I've noticed a whole bunch of these people who are quite web savvy and they do some really good work, and many of whom I call friends, who they're not only adverse to the idea of adopting RWD as a process, but they're actually quite vocal in their opposition of it. So today I would like to address these arguments and hopefully dispel some of the myths that are preventing a large number of talented people from embracing the inherently fluid nature of the web. Now, for those of you, the small number of you out there who are kind of getting into it, maybe a little bit cynical about it, hopefully some of what I'm going to show will help you move over to spreading the good word about RWD. And for those of you, the vast majority of you who feel the same as me, you're already converts, hopefully this will arm you with some reasoning when you start approaching your clients or your colleagues or your boss or whoever will listen, who is a little bit wary of RWD, and you can kind of get them into it with some of these points, hopefully. So, did you guys see that post that was doing the rounds a few weeks ago by Go Cardless? Anyone see that? Okay, a lot of people, that's cool. So they were saying that they had decided to ditch responsive web design. And I must admit, great respect to them. They got a great product. They're good designers, like absolutely lots of respect for them. But my heart sank a little bit when I read that article. Their main argument hangs on the premise that only 2% of their audience were viewing the site on a mobile device. And so it simply wasn't worth the extra time and the extra effort and therefore the extra cost of making it responsive, because we're talking about a very small number of people. Now, the article is really well written, and I think they did a good job of kind of rationalizing their decisions. But I can't help but feel that in a way they've almost slightly misunderstood what responsive web design means. Namely that it's not simply mobile design, nor is it tablet design, or game console design, or futuristic browser that you have on your fridge design. In my opinion, it should not pay attention to any particular device. As Sarah and Laura and everybody's been saying, it should be device agnostic. So let me just elaborate on this a bit. The very first responsive site that I designed and built was the Ampersand website for the first Ampersand conference, which was held in this very room. And as soon as I started doing it, I decided to, when I'd introduced the media query breakpoints, that I would do it when it felt right, when the content felt that that it should naturally adapt. Not specifically to do with whether it was iPad portrait or iPhone landscape or BlackBerry whatever. BlackBerry. So I've always encouraged others to adopt the same process, and clearly this is a theme that's running throughout today. But do it for no other reason that it makes everything future-proof, that if a device manufacturer comes along tomorrow and introduces this new device which changes the world and everybody gets behind, but the size of whatever is slightly different, it doesn't matter. If you're just designing your content and you're managing your breakpoints so that the content looks right, especially as what Laura was saying, then you're not going to have to worry. You're not going to have to retrofit your media queries or anything like that. I personally find that this is very important for when you're considering measure. So, if you're really caring about the way that your type looks on the web, you see a lot of examples of people letting their measure, their line length, simply become way too long and not readable. So a lot of the stuff that I've been doing recently has been trying to find what is the perfect measure, and then introducing some often very subtle media query breakpoints to just kind of tame that and bring it in a bit. Now, I don't believe that RWD necessarily has to take more time or cost more money. I feel that this is the biggest obstacle that's preventing people from getting behind the concept. You think, well, it takes more time there's more stuff to design, and so there's more time and effort and skill, and therefore that equals more money or more cost to the client. And I won't lie to you, I think it does. However, I think it's only to begin with. Now, as Sarah said, we're all kind of finding our process, we're kind of struggling to a degree to adapt our workflows. I think once you've overcome that initial struggle of adapting to a new process, designing and building responsive sites actually needn't take any longer. The biggest obstacle, I think, is designers being quite set in their ways, and I include myself in this. Very much. It took me a long time before I really got behind responsive web design because I was so used to building fixed width sites, I was so used to having that level of control, I didn't want to let go of that. And it's completely understandable. But as Jeremy mentioned when in the first Q&A, he was saying, you know, is this akin to us moving from table-based layouts to CSS? Or is it perhaps even more? I'd say, I'd agree with Sarah that it is perhaps even more of a shift in the way that you're approaching design. I really think, you know, a lot of people will be saying, oh, well, yes, it's all very well if you're designing simple sites. If you're just dealing with one-page blogs or whatever, then it's much, much easier. What about complex sites? But I think it really is about process and about workflow. It's changing the way that you think about design. So for a start, I would say get out of Photoshop. And I'm not one of these people who it's Photoshop or it's designing the browser, it's all or nothing. Not at all. I absolutely do use Photoshop, and I definitely feel it has its place. Laura mentioned she'd like to see the way things looked at certain stages in there, that it was a useful tool for that. Sarah mentioned that you don't necessarily have to, that the PSDs aren't the deliverable. It is just a way of creating certain graphical assets. And I agree with that, and I certainly use Photoshop for kind of sketching almost, for compiling some rough ideas to begin with. But I find myself using Photoshop less and less and moving into the browser quicker. I think if you are a web designer, that you should know how to code. I wrote a blog post on this a while back, and people got very angry and threw lots of tomatoes at me. But it's, I think it's an important point. If for no other reason, that when you're designing responsively, knowing not too much, but just enough markup and CSS that you can start throwing things in the browser and seeing what works, what doesn't work, I think personally is the biggest step that you could ever take if you want to kind of really get behind responsive web design and work out how it all fits into your workflow. Now, I don't say this to sort of create some sort of elite or to chastise those of you who may not be as code savvy. And I do admit that if you say, okay, well, I need to do that, but that's going to take some time, there is some effort, and you know, I need to invest in that in order to get my skills up to that level. That's absolutely true. And so in that sense, responsive web design is certainly going to take longer. But again, I really feel that it's only to begin with. That once you've settled into that flow, once you've rethought your process, then it's not an additional thing that you need to add on. Ultimately, add-ons do cost more. They take extra time and they cost your clients more money. But if you adopt this as an integrated process, that doesn't. So if you listen to what I've been saying so far and what everybody else has been saying so far, there's kind of two key points, certainly that I'd like to make. It's that responsive web design is about making your site accessible and adaptable to any scenario without worrying about specific devices and their proprietary dimensions. And secondly, that responsive web design doesn't need to take more time and cost your clients more money, at least not after you've rethought your approach to web design anyway. However, there probably are still some of you out there who are asking the simple question, but is it worth it? And it's a very valid question, a very, very valid question. And you may be asking it in those circumstances, such as when you or your company are adapting to the RWD workflow, where it can actually equate to more time and extra costs. And the answer, as always, is it depends. So some desktop optimized sites work quite well, for instance, at tablet dimensions. And this was one of the main points that the Go Cardless guys were saying, and you know, it worked okay there, so they didn't really need to adapt it. They only really needed to adapt it for mobile widths. So you can see in their defense that this is very much probably why they are thinking of RWD as mobile design. Because for that particular scenario, it was only really relevant to think of the difference as being the mobile part of that equation. But let's think about some, you know, we need some actual proof. It's all very well us saying, yeah, RWD should get behind it, it's amazing, it's great for everybody, but we do need some actual proof. So Electric Pulp, who an agency who does some really good work over the years, they recently wrote a blog post where they were slowly integrating responsive parts into a client's e-commerce site. And basically everything went up. The results were overwhelmingly positive, even when compared with the general desktop growth of the product, which they then kind of detailed in a follow-up post. But everything was up in terms of traffic and sales and everything. It was absolutely a positive process. Time.com recently adapted to a responsive site, and there's been a couple of interviews with the guy, Craig Ettinger, who's the general manager of Time.com, in a few different places. A really interesting one on magazine.org and on Adweek, where he was just kind of going through exactly you know, what the benefits were. And obviously, if you're reading a publication like Adweek, then it's all kind of relevant for advertising bastards. Anyway, so it's worth it. And by the way, I haven't put any links in these slides, but I've kind of written this as a semi-blog post as well at the same time, so I'll be blogging about it later and I'll have links up to everything. So, in conclusion, I could go on and on about why I think responsive web design is a great idea for websites and for your clients and your colleagues and of course your users, but that's what the whole day is about, so I'll leave you with this. I think you should go away, well, don't go away, not now, but later on go away and create a new HTML document, add some content, don't add a CSS file, and then view that document in the browser. And ask yourself, what do you see? As Laura said, the web has always been fluid. It's always been responsive. And I think what we've done, that I kind of feel a little bit ashamed about, because I did this for many, many years, and I'm sure you've all been there, is that we have been wasting a whole number of years in forcing fixed pixels onto a framework that is inherently fluid and responsive. And I believe that the time to stop is now. Thank you very much. Oh, and as we're doing the Q&A, I've prepared a slide for that.
Lauren, you come here. Yeah, Richard and Josh, great. So let's see. Well, certainly seeing some themes emerging today, I would say. I'll sit with Richard so you can share my microphone, my buddy. Something we've seen over and over again is less talking about, okay, here's how you approach responsive design, here's how to do it from a technical standpoint, but more convincing people. Particularly, we had questions about, you know, I've got a client, Internet Explorer 7, Internet Explorer 8. Is that a necessary skill for a designer now? Is basically telling people how things should be?
It's always been a necessary skill. That's a designer's job, is to be able to persuade the client the best way to do the job. And I think that actually probably more than 50% of a job as a designer is your communication skills and your ability to persuade people.
Do you all agree with that?
Yeah.
The other thing I'm seeing is that there's kind of two ways of confronting responsive web design, which is the one is to go, it's really scary, everything's changing, I want to run away. And the other is to see the opportunities. And I think seeing what you can do with, you know, icon fonts and all of these new things that are coming out every day, that when you're freed up from the constraint of, it has to look exactly the same in all these different browsers, and suddenly we've got a whole bunch more toys to play with. I mean, does it feel that way to you guys?
Well, it does. It certainly introduced a whole load of things that we didn't really think about before. You know, asset fonts being one of those. I'm quite happy using rasterized images in the past, and knowing how to do that with CSS in fairly cool ways, with shifting background images around. But then the need to be much more device independent and resolution independence goes with that. Suddenly, it gives us more tools to think about, and I think it was mentioned earlier on this morning that this is another wave of excitement for us as developers and designers to get behind. You know, the web standards battle was fun at the time 10 years ago, and then everything kind of settled down for a while, and this is a whole new thing for us to learn and get excited about, and that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Tom that said that, you know, he's ready to move into middle management until responsive web design came along. It's like, ooh, fun, right? Okay. So is it like having our eyes opened in a way to the true nature of the web? That was, as you're saying, it was always there. The web was always fluid, and what we've been doing for many years was creating nice facades. We've been faking icons with pixels rather than vector. We've been faking things looking the same across browsers, but really it was just, a facade. And now what we're doing is really just embracing what's always been there.
Yeah. The web has always been free. You can always view a website in any browser of your choice. And we've always had for a long time we've had a multitude of browsers, and this is no different. Going back to the previous point, I think if you design with the tools in mind, if you understand the sort of the benefits and constraints of what is possible, then it becomes an advantage all of a sudden. Having responsive web design enables you to go further. Whereas if you don't know what's possible, or if you're trying to retrofit something, that's where you come across all these constraints and you see all the negative sides.
Right. Matter of perspective. All right, let's get the lights up here, and let's get plenty of questions from people. I see a hand up straight away here.
Elliot, you just touched on the idea of advertising. We work with a number of clients that rely on advertising as their revenue stream. They have fixed sizes. I was just wondering how you thought they kind of like fit in this role of
So to repeat the question, the A word, advertising. In the same way as we see problems with lots of other things that have inherent dimensions, images in general, bitmap images, and we're coming up with new techniques like icon fonts to deal with that. Advertising has inherent dimensions because of the nature of the industry. Elliot, have you in particular come up with any ways of dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the thing that leaps to mind is that when I redesigned Smashing Magazine, because and Vitaly is here as well, so you can ask him about it. And that was a big challenge because there were obviously lots of adverts in the sidebar and there are fixed dimensions. So how do we integrate something that is fixed in one small part of the site into something that is fluid overall? And it was certainly a challenge. And there are different ways to deal with it. I think right now it's just still about being careful about where you place that content at certain widths. We simply got rid of the ads. At other widths they kind of go to the sidebar or wherever else. But I'm starting to see more services now. We're actually seeing some responsive ads appear. So sometimes that's as simple as people saying, okay, well, we'll have set the image to 100% for this particular container, and it will just flex and bend straightforward. But I think there are a few services now, and I'd like to see this become a really widely adopted thing, where the actual ad creators are creating effectively a sort of mini responsive ad, where it's got a couple of elements, it's got like a floated image and some text that is fluid or something like that. And there are a few things out there that's starting to happen. I'd like to see more of that because it is a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge. But I don't think advertisers should treat that as being any different to creating these kind of crazy flash things. It's probably less work to do that.
I agree. I think the advertising question is almost like responsive web design in a microcosm, because you can either say, oh, what are we going to do? Or you can say, oh, this is a huge opportunity. And there is a huge opportunity in the advertising space for somebody to, really lead the pack by embracing the responsiveness of the web. I would also say that when it comes to things like, oh, we've got these fixed width adverts, how will we deal with them? It isn't necessarily our problem to deal with all issues, because if you push back and say, well, what is the actual problem? It might not be anything we're doing. It's the fact that the ads are fixed width. Okay, how do we fix that problem? Just like we had the question of, I've got a client, they want everything to look the same in Internet Explorer 7 and 8 as it does in Chrome, and Firefox, and modern browsers. Well, the actual problem there is that the client expects things to look and work the same in all those browsers. So it isn't necessarily up to us to just try and polyfill, essentially, the current situation and accept those things as written in stone, that we can push back and say, well, wait a minute, the actual answer is a bit bigger picture, a bit more long-term, but we need to fundamentally rethink advertising, or what it means to have browser support. And speaking of Smashing Magazine, Vitaly is here, and he's brought a bunch of books with him, so if you ask a question, you can either have a book apart, or you can have the Smashing mobile book, which is really good, and so you'll get a book. Any other questions? Oh, loads of questions, this is awesome. Who was first? I think back there, actually, you might have been first.
Okay, question for Elliot. You started off by saying, who's real RWD advocates, who's on the fence. I didn't answer either of those questions because I didn't answer. Because I think it's really cool and interesting. I built responsive sites, started off mobile first and got them bigger, and the other way around. At my company, though, we have a mobile site. So we redirect people. So do you think every site should be responsive, or is there a place still for mobile sites which are obviously responsive and desktop sites?
So to repeat the question, I think this is actually a question for everyone, responsive web design, great, and convert, but for this particular situation, there is a mobile website, a separate mobile website. Is that justified? Is there a use case for having a separate mobile website? That fair? That's fair. Okay, anybody?
I think it's a question that comes up a lot, and again, it's one of those it depends situations. I know a lot of people, sort of like a company policy, that we have M dot whatever, and there's been a lot invested into that, and I think that can sometimes cause a reluctance to switch to something responsive. There's a lot of sites where they do have their own mobile version, and people have said, oh, this is why we have it. I personally haven't seen many mobile sites that I thought, oh, I totally see why this is a mobile site. I've often thought that could very easily be a responsive site. And I don't think it's necessarily required for literally every single scenario, but many, many mobile sites I've thought could be responsive. And perhaps often it's the case of that particular company not having the time or the resources to kind of scrapping this mobile site they put a lot of work into and redoing their existing site so that it can be responsive.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of points to that. First of all, is a mobile site or is it a small screen site? If a mobile site is making use of something, knowing that someone's on the go and providing information in a different way or a different kind of information or functionality, then that's different from something which is a small screen site. But building on what Elliot was just saying, we've had clients come to us at ClearLeft specifically asking us to create a responsive design for them or make their site responsive, which is kind of hard to do retrospectively. But our first question to them tends to be, have you already created a mobile site? Because if they have, what they've probably done, and in the case of the clients that we took on, they've created a mobile site, which means that they've optimized the content, knowing that this is a tiny little screen compared to a desktop. So the content has been optimized. They've gone through the process of working out what's the most important things that need to go on there. And so we say, okay, let's start with that. And this can be the basis for your responsive site, and we'll build from that, because you've already made some political decisions there, which hasn't really been touched on yet this morning. I think it will be touched on a bit more this afternoon about some of the sort of internal politics that are required for optimizing sites for small screens, because there's only so much you can display, and everyone's fighting for that position, particularly on a homepage. So often a mobile site can be a really good place to start politically when building a responsive redesign, something like that.
The other issue I've seen with mobile sites, quite often there's content that's been removed that is really important, like certain actions, often it's editing or creating processes, are not allowed to you on the mobile site, and their solution is that there's a link in the footer to the desktop version.
That's never a good sign.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's experienced that at some point, and it's just added pain for no real benefit. I think you get around that issue if you make a responsive site, because the same content is delivered to everyone. You really think hard about which content's important, but you make sure that every action that needs to be taken is possible on the site.
That's true, but I totally agree with what Richard's saying. That if there is an existing M.dot website, don't just think of that as a liability that needs to be replaced by the responsive design. That's a fantastic place to start the responsive part, because trying to get political buy-in for the home page of the desktop site is too much hassle. Trying to squeeze it down is too much hassle. But starting, I think the way Brad Frost puts it is that you've planted a seed with the mobile site, with the M.dot site, and that could eventually become the site. And see also the BBC News, Guardian, potentially it could grow to be just the site, not the mobile site. But there were lots of other questions. So quick. You were pretty fast there, actually.
One of the key things I think I've picked up on today, which is taking reassurance from, is that responsive web design should take a little bit more time, and we should be charging clients a little bit more. Now, my colleagues and I work with quite a lot of SMEs, and they're really excited about responsive web design. And Laura almost hit the nail on the head in answering my question about managing their expectations. We've just started rolling a responsive website out. We've got a lot of our clients coming to us with BlackBerries, iPads, iPad minis, and they're getting really down into detail with us. And I was wondering if the guys had any advice on helping really keep that process efficient.
Okay, so to try and sum up the question, this gentleman has been really pleased to hear that throughout today we've heard that responsive web design takes longer, and a leap of logic has said that therefore we should be charging more for it. I would put back against that, and maybe it's a reframing of the question, why should we be charging more for supporting Internet Explorer 7, 8, 6?